Okay, take two. So last time we got some of the way through looking at Joe Biden's chart. And here are his transits for the day of the inauguration. And we notice his ruler, Jupiter in the seventh house. We talked about this and how this may be one of the worst places for his ruler to be in this transiting chart, because Saturn's right here and Uranus is right here. And those are two, I would say Uranus can add to the positivity of a positive planet, and it can add to the negativity of a negative planet. A lot of the outer planets really depend on the planets that they're close to kind of influence how they're going to act. And so if you get Uranus next to Mars or Saturn, it becomes nastier. Of course, with Uranus, there's always the unexpected. But all of this unexpected Saturn stuff for Joe Biden is in his seventh house in his birth chart. And we talked about how he had, lost his first spouse and I think one or more of his children in a car accident early on. And how this may be the birth chart's way of talking about that. So the other thing that we looked at with him was, because he has the same rising sign as the country itself, he's ruled by Jupiter as well. And so Jupiter and Jupiter represents Joe Biden and the country. And so sometimes we may not be able to tell them apart. That may be the chart's way of saying Joe Biden is like Joe America. You could take it that way. But the other things that we noticed was this South Node transiting the 10th house. And this is true for the US, and this is true for Joe Biden because they have the same rising sign. The South Node is not a good thing. This is talking about old karma coming into his career, essentially. Because his own natal Neptune is right here, that may really also be affecting this. And we talked about how this could represent dementia, because Neptune is all about the altering of consciousness, and the South Node is about old karma. So that was about as far as we got. Another thing I would recommend for looking at with transits is, before you leave looking at any of these charts, always check out what conjunctions are happening, because even more than any of these lines that are crisscrossing the chart, these are aspect lines, and of course they're hugely important. The conjunctions are the most powerful ways that the planets can connect with each other. They're more powerful than even any of these lines. So one of the ones that's noticeable before we leave Joe Biden's chart, and again, everything here looks negative for him, at least that we can see so far. Another thing to notice is Mars on that day will be retrograde on top of his natal Jupiter. And so what does that mean? This natal Jupiter, like we said, Jupiter is his ruler. This represents him. And this is kind of a lovely Jupiter, actually, because it's Jupiter in Cancer, which we talked a little bit about. But we know, at least from knowing about the greater and lesser malefics, having Mars right on top of you is not a good thing. So that's another kind of negative thing to add to the little pile that we notice for Joe Biden on that day. Let's see. And then another thing that I would say we'd want to do is look at anything that's aspecting the 10th house for that person. And so it's noticeable that Mercury, which rules Virgo, and that's the 10th house for Joe Biden, is trining midheaven. And so this is something, it's like saying this Mercury, which sort of rules the job, is trining midheaven, which represents the job. And so that's showing us perhaps one way that this could all kind of come together for him. But let's look at the other charts and talk about what they mean. So we haven't even really looked at his progress charts. For now, I'm trying to think if we should do this or move on to Donald Trump. There isn't too much happening with his, just giving this a once over. So this, as you guys know, the progress chart and the transits are two different ways of looking at bringing someone's chart into the present and talking about what's going on now. And so they're both very important. One of the things that we've kind of studied, oops, going this way, is that with transits, you want to look at the big planets like Saturn and Jupiter and a little bit of Mars, because it sort of gives you a zoomed out view. And then with the progress chart, the sun and the moon become very important. So one other thing to notice, so now we're looking at the progress chart and we're thinking about, well, are we going to notice much difference with him and his ruler? Because that is so important. His ruler is that Jupiter in Cancer. And you can see in the progress chart, he's been around for what, 80 years? So this is 80 days after he was born. And Jupiter's still retrograde, it's still in Cancer. The Black Lilith is still involved with it, which kind of makes it good and wild energy. But we don't expect this part of the chart to change much because this is the progress chart. So let's look at the 10th house. What's going on with the 10th house? There isn't anything transiting it. There isn't anything going through the 10th house that compared to his natal chart. That part's kind of quiet. We talked before, I think, this may have been for the United States chart, about how this Neptune had turned retrograde in the progress chart. And so this confusion about leaders that comes up in the USA birth chart may be intensified right now. For Biden's progress chart, we've got this Neptune is in his 11th house, but it's at the first degree of Libra. And so it's very close to the 10th house, and it's such a powerful planet, especially when dementia is kind of in the picture. One of the other things to notice that's also affecting him, and again, this is just the progress chart. We don't talk much about vertex, but it's sort of like a mark of fate, like a fated meeting. And some people say it's like another descendant. It can represent like a fated encounter between people. That's conjunct this Neptune too. And so it makes me wonder if there is some kind of fated thing where dementia comes more to the forefront because that Neptune has become so powerful. And it is close to the exact midheaven mark, which is at 20 degrees of Virgo. So, but like I was saying, the important things for the progress chart is the sun and the moon. So the sun, his progressed moon is down here in Aquarius, and it's very close to the progressed ascendant. And look what is there too, the south node. So this is again the appearance of the south node as sort of a negative marker. We haven't really found anything yet that Biden has going for him in his chart where it looks like, gosh, this will be a great day for you. It looks pretty crummy. The sun being close to the ascendant is actually what many people used to predict Trump's original election win. But it was closer to the ascendant, and the sun is Trump's ruler, and the south node, excuse me, wasn't involved, and the south node is negative. So this may be sun on the ascendant is everybody's seeing you. You know, the ascendant is your face. It's what people see. The sun being there lights that up with your own vital energy and your own feeling good about yourself. The south node brings all that down, makes it more of a negative interaction. Like people are seeing your old karma. People are seeing things that you've done in the past. People are seeing things that are kind of tied to you that you can't get rid of. So we haven't seen much that's positive for him. The other thing I would always look at in a progressed chart is the moon. His moon, I guess in 80 days, the moon came around to be almost in the same place it is in his birth chart, which is here in the 6th house. This is talking about daily life. It's a nice exalted moon because it's in Taurus, but it's squaring Pluto, which is another thing to notice. And so that brings the power of it down. And what is that moon really talking about anyway? It's in the 6th house, so it's talking about daily life. And so I don't think it's that important. Other than there's a big focus for him on daily life and health at that time, I guess you could say, because the 6th house relates to health. The only other thing I would check is the ruler of the 10th house. So this, which is Mercury. So the 10th house for Biden and America is Virgo. The ruler of Virgo is Mercury, and it's down here in the 2nd house. It's in Capricorn, where it's not too unhappy, because one of the things to notice is these are called triplicity rulers. We haven't talked a ton about them, but you know how last time we looked at something, Mercury in a different chart, I think we were talking about this Mercury and is it strong for Biden? And I said one of the reasons that it's stronger is that it's sextiling Virgo. Scorpio sextiles Virgo because it's one sign away. And so that means it's reasonably strong. This is a strong Mercury because it's trining. It can very easily reach its homeland of Virgo because it's in another earth sign. It's in Capricorn. And so this doesn't look like a bad day for his job per se. His job seems to be kind of secure, but once you've been president, you are president. And we talked a little bit last time about how, you know, having the North Node here in his 10th house, that can be a great sign for being destined for a great job. But again, that's already been fulfilled. That might be over for him. So I wanted to get to our other person, to Donald Trump. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions about what we're seeing for Joe Biden? Does it make sense?
Yes, it makes perfect sense.
Oh, good. The other person that Kelly mentioned last week who might be relevant to this is Kamala Harris. And if Joe Biden were to step aside, she might be involved in this, and we might not know it now. So that's another thought of someplace else we could look at this. So moving on from Biden for now, here's Donald Trump's natal chart. I once took a class on this. This was during the Trump presidency, a whole class on his natal chart. So one of the big things to notice, and we've kind of, we know our way of kind of dipping in and looking for the most important part of any chart, which is the ascendant and its ruler. And we did that with Joe Biden, and that was Jupiter. So looking at Trump's chart, this is hard to see the way that time passages drew it, but he's got Leo rising here, as you can see. So Leo he's ruled by the sun because that's Leo. And up here in the 11th house, you can see where his sun is. even without fully decoding these symbols, you kind of know at this point which ones are good and which ones are bad. And so you can kind of get the overall picture of something without necessarily decoding the whole thing. But you can see up here, the ruler of his chart is in the 11th house, which has to do with friends, with hopes and dreams, that sort of thing. And so this is someone, if you've got your son in the 11th house, you care a lot about sort of like what other people think of you. You really light up in a party or light up in a crowd, which is, I think that's true for Trump, certainly. But then that sun is strengthened by, there's the North Node and there's Uranus. And we were talking about how, if Uranus is with the good guys, he can play a good role. And if Uranus is with the bad guys, he can play a bad role. And so I would add him as a positive, but sort of chaotic force in this chart. And so this is just talking about Trump himself, this little cluster of planets. The other thing that I wanted to draw your attention to that's really important about Trump's chart is it's drawn badly in time passages. Well, he's got Pluto in the first house. We notice that. And then this is Mars conjunct the ascendant. And so this, I would say the sun is Donald Trump's ruler. And he has to share that with, the will of the people if we were looking at this in an overall chart, in the same way that Biden has to share Jupiter with America too. But having Mars right on the ascendant, we've talked before about how powerfully that it's like putting Mars in every sign here. And so he's very, very associated with the planet Mars and everything that that means. And so that's something to keep in mind too. Mars being kind of a signifier for Trump, another kind of stand-in for him. Let's see. Oh, the other thing, the thing that's most significant, that people think is most significant about Donald Trump's birth chart, there seems to be something that I would say is unique or semi-unique or iconic about Trump. He has a personality and a charisma. I'm told the kids now that just call it Riz. He has he has Riz. If my son heard me saying that, he'd be cracking up. He has a charisma or something about him that people see him as able to do, and kind of, he said himself at one point, I could walk down Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and people would still love me. Where does that come from? Where is it in the chart? It's in a very clear place. His ascendant is conjunct Mars, but Mars doesn't really give you that sort of, I don't know what you call it. It's almost like a magical, iconic, charismatic quality. We haven't talked too much about the fixed stars. In fact, I don't think we've talked about them at all, but we will. They're just a bunch of stars, and you can look them up, but it's kind of good to know where they are. Traditionally, there's 15 of them that are used traditionally, and if you look them up on Wikipedia or something like that, you'll see that they all have like an associated herb and an associated gemstone and special lore that's associated with each of them. And so you can, once you know where those fixed stars are, Time Passages, does the app that I recommend people use, does not do a great job with fixed stars. So you sort of have to know where they are. There's a ton of them that are kind of in the same plane that the moon, the sun, and all the planets travel on, the ecliptic. There's stars along there, and that's what the fixed stars are. They don't move, the planets do, but they're kind of in that same band. So probably one of the top 2 or 3 stars is called Regulus. This is just clipped from a website I saw online, Astrology King, where that's a pretty good one for talking about the fixed stars. So Regulus is at 29 degrees of Leo. According to Ptolemy, so this is going back to, I believe, ancient Greece, it is of the Regulus is of the nature of Mars, there's Mars again, and Jupiter, but most later authors liken it to Mars only, while Alvitus, he must be another astrologer, states that it is similar to the sun in good aspect to Uranus. So that's interesting too, because he has Sun and Uranus somewhat conjunct in his birth chart as well. Regulus gives violence, destructiveness, military honor of short duration with ultimate failure, imprisonment, violent death, success, high and lofty ideals, and strength of spirit, and makes its natives magnanimous, grandly liberal, generous, ambitious, fond of power, desirous of command, high-spirited, and independent. So, and this is how it is with the lore that's passed down about all the fixed stars, is sometimes it can sound like it, it's the best of times, it's the worst of times. It's hard to see if they're saying if this is really positive. But what it is it makes having a part of your birth, having your sun or your ascendant or your moon on Regulus would give someone like a king-like power, but also someone that is prone to, strokes of great luck and strokes of bad luck. And I think we saw that earlier in Trump's career when he was still a businessman, and he had, peaks and valleys, and where people counted him out, and peaks and valleys in terms of his public life too. And so when something is associated with Regulus, there's a lot of charisma and a lot of leadership kind of energy. It's very king-like or kingly. And in Trump's birth chart, well, that's the progressions. In Trump's birth chart, time passages doesn't show it, but now you know that it's at 29 degrees of Leo. And so is his ascendant. And so the ascendant is really you, and it's your face. It's how people see you. It's your point of view. It goes both ways. It's your point of view, and it's what people see when they look at your point of view, which is your face. And so people see Trump as this Regulus-like figure, and then add Mars into that. And so I thought that that was a very interesting characterization of him. So that's just his birth chart. And again, we know when we're just looking at the rulers and the planets in the first house that we're dipping into the most important things. And we can always come back to it later if we have questions. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions? Have you looked at Trump's birth chart before? The other thing I wanted to show you guys, I wasn't doing this kind of astrology during the 2016 election. That was like 8 years ago now. But I want to show you guys why some people thought that he would win that year. This is what it is. So we don't really have Hillary Clinton. He was running against Hillary that year, as I'm sure everybody remembers. And we don't have a hard and fast birth chart for Hillary, which makes everything more complicated. If we were back in 2016 and we were trying to do that election.
Azzy, no. No.
If we were back in 2016 and we were trying to do that election, we'd probably have to look at two charts for her and try to figure out which one was better. And there would always be that uncertainty. But supposedly what made people be able to say, Trump is going to win the 2016 election, which some people did, they were able to predict it. But again, it's like predicting the sex of a baby. It's going to be one thing or the other usually. But this is what people say was going right for Trump with the 2016 election. So for whatever reason, it draws the ascendant and Mars better here. And at first you don't see anything, but if you look over here, the sun, his progressed sun, is conjunct that ascendant. It's at 0 degrees of Virgo, but that's just 1 degree away from his ascendant, where Mars is conjunct to that and Regulus. And when the sun comes somewhere, it lights everything up. The sun is associated with king-like roles. And so this kind of thing can show, I would agree that shows something positive for him back in 2016. So just to show you guys like what a I don't know, like a winning chart looks like. This is what people thought it was then. And notice also, and when charts are really telling you something, you'll see that the information kind of cascades or fits together in this way. That sun is also at 0 degrees of Virgo. And we know Virgo, the sign of Virgo, is important for the US because that's the presidency. And so his progressed sun stepping into Virgo could also be seen as him stepping into the presidency. A big spotlight on him, his viewpoint, his face, the sun conjunct his ascendant, which already has all that wild Regulus stuff, and Mars. This ascendant that he has is probably like one of the more powerful aspects of, it's probably the most powerful aspect of his chart in terms of defining him, as it should be, because it's the ruler of the ascendant and it's on the ascendant. Let's see. So this is how Donald Trump won before. And would it look the same? It couldn't. You know, what these charts do is kind of tell us the story. One thing I think is also noticeable in this chart of the 2016 election is look at all these planets down here in the third house. I think that's very interesting, considering I think he was really at the height of his powers in terms of being able to talk to a crowd. And the third house is all about communication. To have Mars and Venus also present here, and the progressed ascendant, this is linking him up with a lot of power. Here's because the ascendant moves in progressed charts. This ascendant still counts. That 29 degrees of Leo will always count. But the progressed ascendant is down here, and it conjoins Jupiter. So that's another positive thing that kind of pointed towards him winning that election. So let's see what it looks like for him next year. So these are his transits.
Pezzy, you can't not chew.
That's Kelly talking to her cat.
Sorry.
That's okay. So one thing I thought was super interesting is, now these are the transits, right? And so we're looking more at the bigger planets than the smaller planets. And for all of these charts, we're looking at the 10th house. So we go to the 10th house. Here's Trump's midheaven. So this would represent the pinnacle of his career. Anybody's career is right at that midheaven point. And it's usually, depending on the house system, it's usually in the 10th house, sometimes in the 9th or the 11th house, if you're using the whole sign house system, that's the one I recommend. But his midheaven, this would look the same in any, no matter how you drew the houses, his midheaven would still be 24 degrees of Taurus. And look who is visiting at 23 degrees of Taurus, Uranus. And so here is the pinnacle of his career. And here is something very unexpected happening to it. So I think that's hugely, hugely interesting. Biden doesn't have anything like that. This is almost like Uranus always brings that breaking barriers energy. It always wants to break barriers, break barriers, break barriers. And with his 2016 to 2020 presidency, he did break a lot of the barriers of what it means to be a president. He was the first president that was ever a businessman, that didn't come from the political world, at least that I'm aware of. And this suggests that if he is elected, that he brings that Uranus energy with him, because that's where his career is at then. It's at the unexpected. And so if it is him, I would say expect more changes. But again, Biden doesn't have anything like this. So what else is here? We can look at his ruler, which is the sun. And the sun is over here, conjunct Pluto, and in the 7th house. Biden's ruler came up in the 7th house too. Having, if the sun, and it wouldn't be because the inauguration is always on the same day, but if this were totally different circumstances and the sun were in the 10th house, the ruler were in the 10th house, that would be a good sign, right? That would be a good sign for him winning the election. But it's over here in the 7th house, which suggests more one-to-one, emphasis on one-to-one relationships. But also notice that Pluto conjoins the sun. And Pluto is transforms, it intensifies. So this is Trump's ruler. His ruler is solar. He has Regulus, which is sort of the crown of the sign of Leo rising. He is this solar figure. And Pluto coming through intensifies that energy. And so his persona may be magnified. There's something about him dialed to the next degree up in this chart. And so that's something else to notice too. Let's see. And what else do we want to look at? So we looked at the 10th house. We looked at the 1st house and its ruler. And I would say those are the big things to look at. Oh, but you always want to, with transits, look at those outer planets and look for conjunctions. Always look for conjunctions. No matter what kind of chart you're looking at, look for conjunctions. Here's another conjunction. Jupiter conjoins his Uranus. So we talked a little bit about his little conclave of planets he has in the 11th house. So this is you know how like Donald Trump likes to, not every hotel owner or spa owner or whatever, resort owner, what would you call Mar-a-Lago? Most people that own one don't want to live there and kind of mingle with the guests, but he does. And this is kind of, that's part of his personality that's represented by that 11th house sun. He gets energy from being around people. But that having Uranus next to your sun and the North Node, this brings a lot of faded energy to Trump, a lot of iconic energy to Trump that just a lot of other people don't have it. It's kind of rare. I mean, he's someone that in real time we've seen like a religion kind of, or a quasi-religion kind of sprout up around him. So look at Jupiter. So we always say in any chart, the best, whatever's happening that's the best is going to be where Jupiter is. And whatever happens that's the worst is going to be where Saturn is. So this little stellium in his 11th house is really him. And the unexpected, barrier breaking, weird luck part of him has, which is that Uranus, has Jupiter sailing over it. And so that's another kind of positive thing where the unexpectedness and the kind of rebellious, I guess you could call it, aspect of his nature will be kind of dialed up to 11. And so this is very interesting to see. Does anybody have any thoughts about this before we move to the progress chart? Okay. The only other stop that I'd make in this progress chart, in this transiting chart, is with the transits, you want to look at the big guys, at least at Saturn and Jupiter. So he's got Saturn over here in the 8th house, transiting his 8th house. So 8th house is mental health, how he's feeling. With Saturn transiting your 8th house, you might feel, and this would go for all Leo rising people, would be experiencing this transit right here in their 8th house. But with the Saturn transiting your 8th house, that might not be very comfortable because the 8th house has so much to do with our emotional vulnerability. And here's Neptune and the North Node, also kind of involved in this planetary pileup in the 8th house. The North Node, again, is really, really positive. And Neptune is altering consciousness. So these are those same planets, only the one that's active in Biden's chart had Neptune tangling with the south node, which has to do with old karma. The north node has to do with what's coming in now. What's the latest thing, kind of thing. So, but you could say potentially Venus is here, and Venus is exalted in Pisces, but you could say that the hardest part for him around Inauguration Day would be mental health stuff. But his public persona, I would expect to be very strong at that time because of these transits. So, progressions. So again, this is sort of like the transits is sort of the zoomed out look, and then progressions are zoomed in. They're even more personal. So, and with the progressions, we look more at the little planets that are closer, and not those big outer planets, because those won't move much in a progress chart. So one thing that I think is noticeable is let's look at those sensitive places in his chart. So Trump here's his ascendant, and we'll be looking at his progressed ascendant too, but here's his regular ascendant that is so special with that Mars conjoining it and the Regulus fixed star there. Just kind of keep in the back of your mind that Regulus is at 29 degrees of Leo, and it's overall considered a positive star, just that it can bring with it kind of twists of fate or fortune is kind of what the lore is about it, but it's seen as hugely positive. So we have been thinking of Virgo as the presidency because Virgo is the 10th house in the USA's chart, and Mercury as the ruler of the presidency. So but that's a little bit weak. It's relevant, but it's a little bit weak because it's not happening in this chart. In this chart, it's Taurus is ruling the job through Trump's eyes. But I do think it's notable because Mercury will be also conjoining this ascendant. And it is one of the stand-ins we have for the presidency itself. And it does rule also Trump's sun and this whole thing up here, which hasn't moved very much because this is the progress chart, of course. But the progress Mercury is right on top of that ascendant. And so this is when people will look at him and see him more as a great communicator kind of thing. And his focus will be on communicating at that point. And again, Biden's charts just don't have anything like this. And these things can manifest in all kinds of ways. I think we should come back to it around the time of the election too, so we can see how this is manifested, at least from what we can see. And see how this seems to have played out. But from what I'm seeing, this looks very positive for Trump and not very positive for Biden. Another thing I would notice, again, so we've got Mercury at that very powerful place for him at the ascendant. Another thing to notice, especially because it's happening in the first house, is his progressed midheaven. This is the symbol for the ascendant, the one that looks like a little hamburger. And then this is midheaven. It looks like the hamburger turned on its side, I guess. A little circle cut in two. That has come and conjoined. The midheaven has come and progressed and conjoined the progressed Pluto. And his Pluto in the progress chart has only moved 2 degrees, which is about right. But midheaven has come down to join it. So where Pluto is really intensifies everything, because that's what Pluto does. It intensifies. And it has a reputation as, and this is another thing we've talked about, as like a generational marker. So someone who has Pluto in the 10th house, for instance, or Pluto close to midheaven, is someone that has generational appeal or power, sway over a whole generation. It has a generational aspect to it, Pluto does. And so having Pluto at his progressed midheaven is another sign of career being very important for him right then. So that's just another interesting thing to see. Let's see. These progressions, let's look at his progressed ruler. We're doing a lot of first house and rulers and sun and moon. So his progressed ruler is right down here in Virgo. The sun, his sun is at 8 degrees of Virgo. So for him, Virgo is money, Virgo is finances because it's in his second house. But for us, we know that Virgo also represents the presidency. And he had something else in his transiting chart coming through Virgo too. Virgo was highlighted in a way in his transiting chart. Let me find what it was. Is it just this? I don't remember. I thought there was something. This is more for him, more negative, having the South Node transiting his second house. So this would be like old karma, kind of coming to fruition for him. But having his, I thought there was something there, so I wasn't remembering clearly. But having the sun, his ruler, if we had this compared to the chart of the nation, this sun would be transiting the 10th house because it is the 10th house of the country. His wealth is the 10th house of the country. And what rules Virgo is Mercury, and Mercury is right on the ascendant. So this is another thing that's really lining up. One other thing I would notice with a progressed chart is the moon. Right here we have the moon is transiting his 4th house. The ascendant itself has progressed down here. And so this is another way of like, he'll be, this is a commentary on his viewpoint, I guess, or the way that he looks at that time. And the moon is not happy in Scorpio. The moon is in its fall in Scorpio, which the way I remember that is it's right across from Taurus. Scorpio is right across from Taurus where the moon is exalted. So if it loves being here, it hates being here. So this could be someone, a weak moon conjoining the progressed ascendant. This might be someone who doesn't look well. People aren't looking well at him. But this moon also it's not doing aspects to other parts of the chart. It's not really doing anything other than being like a sour weak moon near the ascendant. Let's see. The only other thing I would notice here is he's got this progressed Venus conjoining this Jupiter down here. But Jupiter isn't as important for him because it's not his ruler. Alrighty. So do you guys have any thoughts about all this? Or questions? I know that I've been throwing around so many terms like
No questions, it's just a lot.
oh, it's a ton. It's a ton. And this is just me kind of figuring it out in real time and showing you guys how I would do it. But yeah, if any of this isn't clear, just let me know. It's easy at certain places or any place in your astrology journey to get some of these terms mixed up. Like ascendant, midheaven, and the ascendant, remember the ascendant is your face, midheaven is your career. but then, you know, progressed this, transiting that. But as I was saying at the beginning of this, it really is sort of like a weighing of scales of, you know, what sort of looks positive versus what looks negative. And it really seems to almost all be on one side in terms of positive things happening around career for these guys. It seems to be Trump who's experiencing that, not Biden. And I wasn't expecting it to be so clear. So this really, again, talks about their inner experiences, not so much the outer world. And those things are very close, but we've all seen people be upset when nothing's going on, or, you know, a ton's going on and they're not having much of an inner experience about it yet. And so we have to sort of extrapolate from this. But I would say from these charts that it's a big time. We're hearing that it's a big time for Trump's career. It's a time where there's a lot of focus and spotlight on him. His progressed ruler is transiting the sign of Virgo, which is synonymous with the presidency. There's a lot here pointing in that direction. Anybody else have any thoughts before we go? Oh, that's Mary Ellen's chart. Not related. Alrighty, and it's something we'll definitely revisit when the time comes and see, you know, how are these things playing out? How can we link them to real world events? Because the more you practice doing that, the more astrology becomes understandable, and the more the world kind of speaks in that language to you. So thank you guys very much for coming. If there's no other questions, we can wrap up.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Anna.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming.